Great to have you along for the ride. Thanks a lot for stopping by. Really glad to have this young lady on. She's a former U.S. Representative from Hawaii, was a Democrat. It's Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm good, Joe. It's great to see you too.
I've got to ask you, what's it like to be the queen of the world? And you were, when you came out you were a front-running Democrat, you're a military veteran, you're an all-American young lady, and the Democrats said, wow, she's the heir apparent, she's the future, and everybody but everybody agreed with that. Does it get to your head? Do you think to yourself, wow, this is really cool?
No.
Were you skeptical from moment one?
Yeah, I was skeptical from moment one. Like, why are you asking me to do this?
Right.
Why is, Vogue magazine calling me? This is very strange. I don't know anything about this world or what's drawing this attention. But every one of those opportunities that's come my way, I have done my best to take advantage, to use platforms to be able to advance the interests of whether it's my constituents in Hawaii, the people of this country, or a lot of the issues that I've been dedicating my life to working towards.
When they pat you in the back and say, hey, wink, wink, nod, nod, you're our new face of our party and of our movement, do they also say, now we want you to do this, we want you to say that, we want you to vote this way? Do they start getting your ear on all the decisions that you have to make for your constituents?
No, I think there was probably some unspoken expectation, but nothing ever explicit. And I think that's where, as very quickly as I started to do my work in Congress, they realized that I was not going to be someone who would accept those kinds of messages or demands or expectations, and that I was going to remain the same independent-minded person I've always been.
Go to TulsiGabbard.com. Of course, former U.S. Representative from the great state of Hawaii, Tulsi Gabbard. Thanks for taking the time. As you're in that office, as you make that move to Washington, which is a world away from Hawaii, geographically and philosophically, did you notice that it wasn't what you thought it would be immediately?
I had the opportunity to work in Washington for a couple of years as a legislative aide for one of Hawaii's then U.S. Senators, Daniel Akaka. He was a World War II veteran,
right,
lifelong public school teacher, and just a great, great, kind man. He was the chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee in the Senate, and so I worked with him to support him in those efforts between my two Middle East deployments, and got a behind-the-scenes look at the machinations of the quote-unquote swamp of permanent Washington. And so when I went back as a member of the House of Representatives, I feel like I went in maybe with a little bit of an advantage from people who'd never worked in and around Washington before. And so it was definitely not, I was coming in with very clear eyes about the different peer pressures and power pressures that are real still.
It's Tulsi Gabbard. Go to TulsiGabbard.com. Is that where they can find your new podcast? I know you're doing a show now. Can they go there and find out where to go listen?
Yes, go to TulsiGabbard.com. All of the links are there to the podcast. I've also got a Substack page. You can get the podcast on YouTube or Rumble and anywhere where you prefer to listen to your podcasts. Comes out every Tuesday, and I'm taking on a lot of the issues that I brought up in my statement announcing I'm leaving the Democratic Party, and using this podcast as a way to be able to dive deeper into these issues, share my views, perspectives, and experiences that has driven me to hold the positions that I do, and then also bringing on guests who have their own experience and perspective to share on the topic as well.
I want to get into your announcement full-throated in a moment, but I've got to ask you this, and I hope you take it as the compliment that I mean it. Your demeanor and your sensibility, the way that you seem to stop and think before you speak, and what you say really has meaning, is so different than what I'm used to out of Washington. Now, there are a few there that do the same thing, but they've got a different demeanor and a different sort of tone of voice than you do. Were you fearful at all? And again, you don't seem like a fearful person, don't get me wrong. But were you fearful that you weren't in there yelling and screaming and pulling your hair out and lighting people up and finding a camera and a microphone every time you could to say whatever the cause of the day was? You seem to be very, very well grounded. Were you fearful that demeanor would at all not work with Washington?
No, it's funny that you asked that question, and I will take it as a compliment in the way it's intended.
Good.
It's funny you asked that. It never actually crossed my mind. I've always been very comfortable with who I am and recognize my own strengths and weaknesses. Communication is everything. Being able to communicate clearly what I'm trying to convey is always what I've sought out to do and always try to do better. But when I sit at home and I watch the people screaming and yelling, their hair is on fire,
Yeah.
pounding the podium, like that doesn't do anything for me. And so it certainly has never been anything I've tried to change in myself to be more like other people. What I know is that whether you're someone who's screaming and yelling and your hair is on fire, or you're someone more closer to my demeanor, as long as you speak from your heart, then you'll be able to connect with people. As long as you are who you are and you're not trying to pretend to be someone that you're not, then you'll be able to connect with people, which is exactly what, working in public office in the political sphere, and frankly, even in what you do, Joe, that is where there's opportunity to learn and to grow and to affect change.
Well, I think every once in a while we get wound up as human beings,
Yeah, I do
that's
too, every now and then.
I don't believe you, but
It's true.
we'll find out on your podcast when people check it out on Tuesdays. Go to tulsigabbard.com. But what I do find is that when I do get wound up, people are like, "Whoa, that really hit them a different way." Because generally speaking, I want to communicate, I want to entertain, I want to make people laugh or think or get involved. And I think that you're the same way. When you decided to run for president, people actually found out that was really who you were, and I think you stood out. You were the most Googled person for like weeks after the first debate. Then they started excluding you from the debate because they were afraid of you. But as Kamala Harris is calling Joe Biden, her future president, and she's the VP, a racist to all of the world, you were saying, "Wait a second, I want to focus on this. This is what it's important to the American people." That's why they looked you up. And again, that demeanor was you were almost Teflon. And immediately you became a Russian spy or something in the minds of the Democrats because you didn't get in line and say, "Look, I've got to back Biden, or I've got to back Harris, I've got to back, fill in the blank person that they say I should back." Were you blindsided by that? Did you know they would get that nasty?
I had a feeling because I had experienced some of it already before.
Really?
What I didn't fully anticipate, Joe, was how closely they would be colluding with the mainstream media, the big for-profit corporate media, and how very deliberate their attempts would be to, put me over in the corner in silence, or actually, but at a certain point, there was a full-on media blackout where they just didn't cover my campaign at all. It was as though I wasn't even running. They didn't include me in lists of people who were still running for president, and that was the thing that caught me off guard. I thought, hey, running for president is a tough thing. The odds of winning are low for anyone, but my running for president would at least give me as equal an opportunity as any other person running to present to the American people my platform and why I'm asking to serve them as their president and commander in chief. That fantasy that I had was shot down literally on the day that I announced my candidacy, when we knew NBC News was going to do some kind of conflated, fictional story about how I'm liked by the Russians, which is the line they use for anybody and everybody that they don't like, right? And so instead of running the story on whatever day they said they were going to run it, they saw my announcement speech was planned for a specific day. They bumped it up, released this story as I was on the stage announcing my candidacy. And so that was the first sign, followed by many, many others, of just how, again, the media, people talk about interference in our elections, but they never talk about the most guilty culprits in that interference. And it is the big for-profit corporate media working with big tech social media and the political powers that be. I experienced it from the Democrat Party and the national level, to sequester and limit who voters are exposed to. So you think, okay, every person has the right to cast our vote. That is the way we can affect change in this country. It is critical. It's why I'm campaigning for the next 3 weeks to get people out to the polls to vote for some great leaders and great Americans. But what are voters supposed to do when the political party power elite are working with big tech and corporate media to say, okay, well, if you have 10 options as a voter, we only want you to notice these 3, and here's what we want you to know about them, and we don't want you to know about the others. And if you look them up, we're going to make sure there's a whole lot of negative stuff, a lot of it which is not even true, so that you won't be even tempted to go to go past or around the people that we want you to know of. And that's exactly why when I questioned Kamala Harris on that debate stage, my shock was number one, she was so unprepared, like
Right.
she never expected anyone to question her record. But number two, why didn't anyone question her record? Why didn't a reporter at any level say, hey, here, you're saying you want to be the prosecutor president. Here's the record that you're standing on. How do you account for that? Just a simple question like that was never asked. And it's because of what I'm talking about. They already made their decision of who they
Right.
liked, who they didn't like, and how dare Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii, raise these issues to Kamala Harris about her record, and the world saw her answers
Well,
or lack thereof.
I love the backbone that the world saw that night in you, and they kept on excluding you from debates. And you're right. Every single media-friendly person to Tulsi Gabbard, suddenly the same exact people were saying, almost as if written, the same exact lines about who you were and why
Right.
you should be ignored and why you were bad and why Putin loved you and you went to his wedding or something. The whole thing was just so ridiculous. It's very comparable, I think, to Donald Trump. I've interviewed him like 12 times now. We've got a good relationship. But one of the first interviews I ever had with him, I said, what were you thinking? You made all this money for NBC on The Apprentice. You're a billionaire that everybody wanted your money from. Yet when you ran for president, did you really think they would just love you still? He said, yeah, I did. I thought they were my friends. And I get the feeling you're a trusting person like I am. I'll trust you until I shouldn't. And I think
Right.
immediately you found out, they're not questioning Kamala Harris, so she's gotten the tap. She's going to be somebody big. Nobody was calling out Joe Biden on his obvious cognitive issues and his history as a racist in this country, and you just watched them go, and you really thought it was an even game when you walked in, kind of like Trump. He thought, hey, I've got these friends for 30 years. Why would they turn on me? And every single one did. Is that a good comparison or no?
I think that's very fair. They show their true colors through these political campaigns, and I think this is where this culture of fear has gotten so bad because they perpetuate this response that if you dare to step outside the lines, if you dare to challenge their power, which I think is the thing in common, right? They saw
Yes.
Trump as a threat. They saw me as a threat, and so their way of dealing with that, rather than doing it in the American way, where you have a debate in our open marketplace of ideas, and let voters be exposed to their ideas and make the decision based on that comparison. They don't want to allow any of that to happen, and so they resort immediately to smear tactics, character assassination, spreading lies, and trying to plant that seed of doubt so that whatever you say, people will kind of think for a minute like, oh, I don't really know much about her,
Right.
but there's
Well,
something
it's
there.
a
And
feather
the
in your
sad part
cap.
is it works.
Well,
It
it's a
works.
feather in your cap because they were scared to death of you, and I think that's a very good thing. A couple of years later, hopefully you see it that way. At the end of the day, you really did threaten the machinery of the Democrat Party because you love America and because you wouldn't fit
Yeah.
into a box for them. And I think that that's really, really impressive. It's Tulsi Gabbard. Go to TulsiGabbard.com. She's got a new show, the Tulsi Gabbard Show, every Tuesday. Go to the website, find out where you can go and listen to it, watch it on YouTube, on Rumble, and several other sources. All right, so I've got a really good friend. His name is Nico LaHood. He was the DA here in San Antonio, Texas, in Bexar County, Texas. And he was a Democrat lifelong, blue dog Democrat, and he and I are best friends. And I'm a conservative through and through. But he was a conservative Democrat, and he was somebody who really did weigh every situation by what was presented. And let's take these facts, put them together, and see if this person's guilty or innocent or whatever as the DA. He decided to walk away as well. He said the Democrat Party left him a long time ago and left his father and his mother and everybody historically who voted Democrat. And I get the feeling that's exactly what happened to you. But I guess the first question about your announcement the other day has to be, Tulsi, why were you ever a Democrat? What did you think the party was?
Well, Joe, when I joined the Democratic Party, it was 2002. I was in Hawaii, 21 years old, not attached politically or
Right.
affiliated. Never really thought about, oh, well, which party am I supposed to be a part of before then? But I was running for state house, and I had to answer that question on the form. I had to fill it out in order to file my election papers, and so I really did start to think about where I felt most at home or most aligned. And what I saw then was a party inspired by the vision of Dr. Martin Luther King, of each of us as Americans being judged based on the content of our character, not the color of our skin. I was inspired by President Kennedy. I was inspired by leaders both in Hawaii and across the country who were committed to fighting for working people, the everyday American who's struggling and dealing with a whole host of challenges. a party that represented the traditional kind of liberalist principles of individual freedom, civil liberties, a government of, by, and for the people.
Right.
And that was the Big Tent inclusive party that I joined. Fast forward 20 years later, and much more so over the last few years, that party is no longer recognizable. Today's Democrat Party has been taken over and completely controlled by these radical, so-called woke ideologues who are essentially, they're fanatics. That if you don't agree with them on every issue, and that's not even good enough, if you're not out there marching and protesting with your bullhorn and screaming and yelling and shouting, anything short of that, you're not good enough. You are not welcome, and they will seek to undermine your freedom of speech and cancel and smear you. And a party that is undermining our fundamental God-given rights and freedoms enshrined in our Constitution, and doing so because they're in power with the force of law, the Department of Justice, the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, all of these institutions behind them, which they are weaponizing against their political opponents. That is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And for me, I could no longer have that letter D next to my name and be associated with any of that.
That's it for part one of my special interview with former U.S. Representative, former candidate for United States President, Tulsi Gabbard. Part two tomorrow. We're back after this on the Joe Pags Show.